So welcome to the Northeast Georgia Science Symposium. Tonight we're speaking about exotics and legal pet ownership. So think about it like Tiger King with raccoons. It's a joke.
Okay.
So, and tonight, instead of the objective, observable, repeatable conversation speech I want to give, I want to talk about 1 + 1 is 2. So 1 + 1 is...
Just starting this off.
Is it always 2, sometimes 2, or 2 whenever you feel like it?
Always.
Whenever you feel like it, it is always 2. 1 + 1 will always equal 2. Always. So facts are facts no matter how you feel about them, or who gave them to you, or who tells you nuh-uh. Facts are facts. They exist independent of your feelings, or your worldview, or other stuff. They simply are. So that's the 1 + 1 = 2 speech. And tonight we have Kerry Ervin, the owner and originator of the Hand-Me-Down Zoo. I love how the Hand-Me-Down Zoo came into being. It's an incredible story. It's very Kerry. So she was looking on Craigslist and Marketplace and other places and ran into a guy who had emus. And he was like, I didn't know these emus were going to get so big. And she was like, how big do you, I mean, emus are all the same size, so those are going to get the same size as all the emus. It was a crazy conversation. And emus have little yellow stockings when they're chicks. They're adorable, and then they get to carry it like this long.
6 feet. 6 feet, 150 pounds. Velociraptor. It is.
It is.
Velociraptor.
It's great, and they do their wings. And the guy was like, "Oh no, this is much bigger than I had anticipated." You can just type it up. Emus, how big do emus get? And it's not like some emus are small and some no, emus big. So she had a license to rescue animals to own exotics. And so she started going on Craigslist and other places, and these people who had bitten off more than they could chew were able to turn in their animals to Kerry. So I'm going to turn it over to Kerry, and she's going to tell us all about this Tiger King with raccoons. Hey, Kerry!
All right, so ironically, she doesn't know that full story.
Obviously.
We were actually moving out to Winder, and she had just moved to Conyers? Conyers.
I don't know, I'm making
Yes.
stuff up, man.
Anyway, it's probably around October-ish. We're driving out to her house, and we passed by a residence. Inside their yard was a 6-foot-tall dinosaur bird on our way over to Ashley. On the way back home, we have to pass by the same property. Ironically, as I am driving by, the person directly in front of me owns the property, and she decides to drive up her wonderful driveway. Like a crazy person, I decided to follow her. I had 2 small screaming children in the car, and I wanted them to see 6-foot-tall birds, because where else were you going to see 6-foot-tall birds? In doing so, they was very accommodating, and they allowed us to see and meet their emus. And then I told them, hey, at some point, if you decide to have chicks, let us know, because I understood that when they were born, they looked like little zebras. And my kids, once again, would like to have the opportunity to see emus. So 2 days after Christmas, she called me out of the blue. I never expected to hear or see from her again. And she said, come over and see the emus. And I was like, okay. So we drove back out, we saw the emus, and then realized that her husband owned a business inside his home, and the emus stunk. It was 2 days after Christmas. It was way too cold for them to go outside. Therefore, he could not keep his chicks. He loved his adults, but chicks were not part of the equation. So he said, do you need them? And I said, I have 14 acres, and I didn't ask my husband. He just came home to 2-foot-tall birds. And then proceeded to live into our house for about the next 6 months, because that's how long it takes for Georgia to finally be summer. And at that point, they could go outside. So that was kind of where we started in the more exotics side. So when I came here originally, I was from Florida. Florida is a very different ballpark. Anything you see me with, you can legally own in Florida, no questions asked, very minimal permitting, or at least that was the case back when I lived there. When I moved into Georgia, I learned pretty quickly that this was not the way Georgia functioned. You need permits for everything, except children here. So we decided to open a facility where people could come and meet and learn about exotics. Not because I cared about having, I wanted a kangaroo. I didn't care about owning a tiger necessarily. But I wanted people to understand that an animal like this, you can have here in Georgia, no questions asked. But what you didn't realize is when your child asked for a bunny, they asked for a blanket statement animal. How many of us want to play a game? How many of us know dogs really well? Moderately. I'm going to describe a dog. I want you to tell me what kind of dog it is. You don't have to raise your hand. You can just yell it out. I work for the police station.
German Sheriff.
I work for the fire department.
Dalmatian.
I am tan. I have a black nose, and my face looks like you kicked it.
Pug.
For those of us born back in the 90s and existed at that time, what was the Akiro Taco Bell dog? Chihuahua. State dog of Georgia. I have really nappy hair, and I look really cute, and I'm now being bred with everything. So see how that worked? I didn't even have to show you the dog. You knew exactly what I was talking about. And that's where the animal world exists here in Georgia. This little rabbit is a miniature Rex. He is a breed of rabbit. There are over 150 different breeds of rabbit that you can purchase and own. And just like a dog, you need to understand that each rabbit has different maintenance, different care, different sizes. If you live in a tiny apartment, you're probably not buying a Great Dane. You're probably getting a Terrier or a Chihuahua because you don't have size for a Great Dane. Well, if you buy an average size miniature rabbit house, you probably don't need a Flemish Giant at 30 pounds. This little guy here is Thunder, and he doesn't require a lot of care for grooming. I also have an Angora rabbit that requires me to brush her 2 or 3 times a week. If she was outdoors, that is daily. So we try to make sure that people understand what they're getting into, offer facility for animals to be placed when they're no longer expected to be in the homes that they were in, either because of changes in circumstances or because people just didn't understand what they were taking on. We give parents the ability to understand what's going to cost you to own this animal, what timeline you're going to need to be able to provide. Maybe you're thinking this animal is one, and maybe for your family, a different animal is a better recommendation. So we help assist in those recommendations. We also give the children an ability to touch an animal. Biggest thing we get surrenders right now is because parents buy a child a pet. And in doing so, 2 days later, their child is in hives because they didn't know, I'm allergic to this bunny, or maybe the hair or the hay that it eats. So we offer the ability for our parents to actually see what their kids weren't afraid of, what they weren't afraid of, understand what it was going to take, and make sure that that medical element doesn't exist anymore and it's an appropriate pet. Now this little guy is Thunder, and unlike what she told us, when you have bunnies, 1 + 1 does not equal 2. That equals 42. So there is a gray zone there. Now bear in mind with this little guy here, he came to us after somebody was caring for him and thought they were doing a decent job, and what they found out was that he actually had really significant sores under his feet. So he's permanently handicapped with us. He has had a full recovery, but unfortunately his feet will never be right. So we have to actually make sure that we do special care in checking those feet at this point. So we also get a lot of animals that are handicapped or not being cared for correctly, and then now in permanent conditions that we have to face. So metabolic bone disease for a lot of our sugar gliders, our reptiles, animals like this get a lot of bone issues as well, but they also get a lot of feet issues, behavioral issues because they weren't kept in the social structures that they needed. And then we're a place for people to surrender animals that they aren't legally allowed to have. So Georgia here is a very strict state on what you can and can't have. Because you see it on Craigslist does not make it available to you. Some of our animals you are allowed to have, but require specific documentation or paper trails, like your sugar gliders. Sugar gliders you cannot buy just from random Joe Schmo off the list. you're supposed to be purchasing from a USDA licensed breeder. Now, you may be able to buy off of Craigslist and get that animal illegally, but if you decide 6 months later, I do not want that animal, you require that license to sell it. You can rehome for free. Bear in mind, this is not a misdemeanor. It is felony. You are trafficking in wildlife to sell a sugar glider in the state of Georgia without a license. You don't need to have your children watch mommy and daddy go to jail because of a 6-inch long possum from Australia. So it's important that we're helping with that education, making sure that people understand what it is they've got going on. All right, Elise, if you will take this. So we got a lot of animals that people think kind of blanket statement, you can own just about anything here. And unfortunately, that's not the way that works. I commonly get a lot of people that tell me, well, the pet store didn't tell me that. What I like to compare a pet store to is a car dealership. If you're going to buy a Porsche tomorrow, did you learn anything about that Porsche at the dealership? You probably learned all that you needed to know online, in magazines, meeting people with Porsches. You did all these things to make you know, I want this particular car. You didn't show up at the dealership and say, hey, I need to know everything about the Porsche right now before I decide to buy a Porsche. Your animal should be treated the exact same way. When you purchase an animal from a pet store, I don't want you to go there looking to learn. At that point, you should have already learned what you needed to learn. The reality check is a lot of us are buying pets out of places like Petco and PetSmart. Right now, Petco and PetSmart are mostly staffed by kids in high school. You're expecting this child in high school to have owned every animal inside that store and then tell you exactly how to care for it. Well, if you've never owned a chameleon, you probably don't know what it requires to own a chameleon. So for you to expect a child half your age to know that, that's wrong. Their job is to sell you a product. Unfortunately, that is a live animal sometimes. Your job as a responsible pet owner is to know whether or not you're allowed to have that animal before you get there. Know how to take care of that animal. And if you grew up when I did, you didn't have those endless resources because the internet wasn't quite there just yet. But now in this day and age, you have access to the entire world on a phone you can carry around with you everywhere you go. So in my personal opinion, there is no excuse for you not to have that education prior to bringing that animal home. Oh, but Susie Q down the street, see, she had this little fun thing and I thought, you know, she couldn't keep it and I was just gonna take it. That's not the way we should be looking at an animal. At no point should your animal, whether it's a $20,000 Heison's McCall or a $2 parakeet you got off of the street at Pendergrass, you should have researched that animal long before you ever got there. When we run our facility, we do everything by appointment. And some people find that a pain because they don't want to have to book an appointment. But the reason why we do this is A, because we don't want to overwhelm our animals. Not all of them are coming from wonderful rainbows and sunshine backgrounds. But it's also because we are trying to instill in people that animals are not impulsive. Your decision last minute to come to my property to interact with or see or learn about an animal should not be any more impulsive than it is to actually go out and get one and bring one home to your family. When we do adoptions, we do not adopt at a tour. You will need to contact me later. Go home, research, acquire what you need to own that animal properly, and at that point we can discuss adoptions. We actually freeze adoptions at this point of year. Why? We have Easter. I get contacted constantly through these next 2 months because people want chicks, ducks, lambs, goats, bunnies. And then you know what? I'll get the back end of that in another 2 months because their Easter bunny is now a rabbit. A very specific breed of rabbit, and they didn't understand what they were getting into, or they wanted a photo shoot. We've actually evolved our facility so that we now do photo shoots ourselves because we'd rather have you come to us and seek our animals that have been trained to be able to handle these situations with small kids that are screaming and grabbing. Get your photos out of the way, and at that point, don't displace an animal or try to find a new home for them. All right, so I'm going to kind of discuss with our little tortoises here. Not all of us are created equal. Now, I have 3 different tortoises here, and they all may look very similar. Bear in mind, some of my tortoises I didn't bring today because they're 140 pounds, and I can't lift that and just drag that everywhere. These guys are all pretty much full grown. This little one here is the only one that has the potential of getting larger than this. Does anybody know what kind of tortoise this is? And no, it's not a bottle cap tortoise. Go ahead.
Why does it have a green thing on it?
The bottle cap. So this right here, put these two guys down. This right here is what we call a gopher tortoise. This is a state native tortoise. Here in Georgia, you are illegal to own any of our tortoise species here in Georgia. Somebody had this as a pet. They tried to come to me to tell me, oh, I didn't have it as a pet. This just showed up in the backyard and my dog chewed it. When this animal arrived, and yes, they did know exactly what it was. They were very well educated that this was a gopher tortoise. What we ended up finding was a tortoise missing a front arm. That was why they reached out to me. And when I examined this shell, I realized that this shell has what we call pyramiding. This is like a fat roll for a tortoise. It's permanent damage. It will never go away. What this has done now is locked in with these little plates here are called as scoots. She can't shed her shell. I now have to supplement her entire diet with vitamin D because she can't get that from the sun the way she's supposed to. It's like I painted her permanently with paint. This should be smooth. Very similar to this. This is what happens when you don't have the right diet and when you don't have enough space out in the wild. So unfortunately, this animal that they tried to tell me was not being kept by them. I can tell this tortoise is telling me a different story. See how she's nice and round all the way around? See how this one looks like he's been chewed on? This is years of damage. This is not the first time this dog has chewed this animal. They seeked help at this point because she was so significantly damaged, she had lost that front leg. We had to take her into our vet. $1,200 later, we had to then have that amputated. The bottle cap right there is to help her so that when she digs in the ground, she doesn't scoop dirt and seep that into that incision area. So it helps her prevent her from getting an infection or reopening an area because it's weakened there. At this point, she's fully healed, and she will at that point be getting a wheel. So she'll have an all-terrain wheel that she'll be able to truck around a little bit better. But she can't go back out to the wild. Bear in mind, this is a federally protected, critically endangered animal. This is the gopher tortoise again. This is a reproductive female that we've no longer got in our state of Georgia here. Because somebody decided illegally this was going to be a pet because they didn't want to go out and buy a Russian tortoise. This is a legal pet. You can have this one, you can buy it from almost anywhere here in Georgia. This is as big as this gets. Nice and manageable. Now bear in mind, this tortoise is going to push 50 plus years on this planet. How many of us expect to be on this planet in 50 years? Yep, there's about 10 of you in the back. I don't even plan to be here in 50 years. I mean, it would be nice. But
You can pass it down to me.
Exactly, so that's my daughter. Her children's children are going to take some of her tortoises because they're going to live 200 years. So bear that in mind. Illegal, federally protected. The woman should have seen some significant court time because of this animal and the damage it received. We kind of worked with her, made sure that that wasn't necessarily going to happen because at the end of the day, she had small children. She was just trying to be a mom, and I get that. But at the end of the day, this is who paid for that. Our ecosystem that is dying is who paid for that. This is what she should have gotten instead. This here is a Russian tortoise. This is as full grown as she's going to get. Nice and manageable, just a long expectancy. Anybody know what the most commonly owned pet tortoise here in Georgia is? Slider.
Yellow slider.
Eastern box.
Eastern box turtle. So your slider is the most commonly owned turtle. It is a legal pet you're allowed to have. Technically, you can pull up to 10 of them from the wild a year without a permit. Once you've reached 10, you then need to have a permit or license from the state allowing you to obtain more. This is very deceiving because his little name says box turtle. This, however, is not a turtle. This is a tortoise. Once again, it is illegal to own any of our tortoises here in Georgia. This is the most commonly kept turtle here or tortoise here in Georgia, illegally. So bear that in mind. When you see this little creature crawling across the road, we want you to help it. If it's safe for you to pull over and help her across the road, perfect. Please put her in the direction she's pointing, or she's going to start from start all over again. She's going to turn right back around. She's going to head and continue on down into that next area. What I don't want you to do is take her. The only time you should pull a turtle from its natural area is if all of a sudden there is a divider in the road that didn't exist last year. Because at that point you're finding a female. How do I know male from female? If this is cupped, it's a boy. Because certain things have to happen, he needs a cup. If it's flat, you're dealing with a female. Now, if you watch Facebook, every once in a while they push out, you can't move females because they only live in a quarter of a mile and they are depressed and they're going to spiral out of control and not be able to be a turtle anymore. For your male, that's not true. He doesn't necessarily get easily rehomed into a new environment. But your female, just like a sea turtle, is going to travel to her original hatch zone. So when we get a female, and that's usually what we get brought to us because that's who you're seeing traveling. The male doesn't need to go anywhere because the ladies come to him. Your female, on the other hand, needs to travel back to her hatch site. If she's carrying eggs and she cannot find that hatch site, she will probably not try to lay. So we have to get x-rays sometimes and check whether or not they're egg bearing. We actually have to give them Pitocin, just like us ladies had at the hospital in order to have your babies. And sometimes we have to force a delivery because they can't find where they started out, and that's why they're traveling. So typically when we see these guys crossing the road, that's what you're seeing is a female traveling back to her nest site, just like in the wild with the sea turtles. So bear that in mind. Super cute, super wonderful, needs to stay in its natural environment, not in your private homes. The other thing we commonly see is painting our turtles. Please stop painting turtles. If you need to mark something and hope it comes back to you, that's what dollar bills are for. You can put your initials all over that. When you paint this turtle's shell, you are then blocking that vitamin D, once again making it deficient in her body. And she will be actually hurt and injured long term. The other question we get commonly with turtles is, when does she leave her shell? She does not. You're seeing that spine right there. She is physically fused and attached to that shell. She doesn't change. She's not a hermit crab. This is her shell. It's got to grow with her. So when we damage it because we paint it or because we keep these guys and they don't get to grow correctly, you have damaged that turtle for the rest of its life. All right. Good morning. All right, so this right here is Indy. Let's see, I want to pick her up real quick. Can you come up, please? I got you. You can let go. Stay. So this right here is Indy. This is a Myers parrot, or sometimes referred to as a Sneagle parrot. And this is allowed to be a pet in Georgia. If you're looking to get exotic, birds are about as exotic as you can get here. The limitations on birds in our state are very minimal. You can have everything from a 6-foot-tall dinosaur bird, aka the emu, all the way down to this little parrot, no questions asked. Why you would want a 6-foot-tall dinosaur bird, I'm not 100% sure. I can say that because I own 3. So bear that in mind.
Harmless.
This is probably the most abused animal in our pet industry, and nobody knows about it. Why? Because we associate them just like people in every way but where it counts. Out in the wild, this animal is guaranteed 2 things: the ability to fly and a flock. It's the first 2 things we take away every bird we own. We understand the lack of flight because at the end of the day, if this bird was to fly off and get lost, there's a huge impact to that bird's safety and wellness. Flock, on the other hand, we don't have an excuse for. I get questions all the time. Well, wait a minute. If I buy another bird, will it not bond to me? If that bird is going to bond to you, it's going to bond to you. It doesn't matter if it has 2 birds or 10 birds or 1 bird. If it's meant to bond to you, it will bond to you. It does require you to work with that bird, though. They don't bond instantaneously. This is a prey animal. It's not born to bond to you. You have to earn that trust and commitment going nice and slow and being patient. Now, Indy here should be about 1 inch taller. But Indy is a quintessential, typical parrot that was kept and bought for a couple years. And then unfortunately, the owner decided, I don't want you anymore. And what they ended up doing is what most people do with a beginner pet. sold her. I'll put you back in your thing. I'll carry your thing. And that's what most people do with beginner birds. They have them for a couple years, they get bored with them, they're starting to see behavioral issues, they're not at that point keeping them any longer. I want you to imagine you're 4 years old. Think back to when you were 4, for those of you that aren't still. I want you to imagine your sisters, your brothers, your parents, your best friend, your blanket, your lovey or stuffed animal, your dog, your bed, your car, your school, your church, everything that you ever knew, loved, and held dear and made you feel safe. Now I want you to think about this one. The next morning you woke up, it disappeared, every last bit of it. You had no parents, no friends, no family, no pets, no safe bed. Nothing was comfortable anymore. You didn't understand. And on top of all of that, now everything's new and different, and there is another little person doing this. Well, yes, we see. That's what birds go through. The mentality of a bird, although highly intelligent, emotionally is equivalent to about a 4-year-old. So Indy here took this to an extreme. A lot of times when birds don't handle being rehomed, they do what we call self-abuse behaviors, usually ripping out feathers. Some of these guys will rip feathers out so badly that they actually don't grow back. Indy decided to be a little bit more extreme. Her feet, she didn't like her feet. She was very self-conscious about her feet. Now I want you to envision you just bit your tongue. How many of us have bit our tongue? Everybody. Sucks, right? Hurts. That's a fleshy little blob of skin inside your mouth. Now I want you to imagine your finger. What would you have to do to cut your finger off? You'd have to cut through skin, flesh, muscle, tendons, bone, nerve endings. She took 1, and then 2, and then 3. They did seek help for her. At that point, 8 months later, nothing changed. So she decided, I'm going to take my other foot. So now Indy is permanently damaged with a handicap. She has no feet. She's fully flighted, but if you were a plane and you didn't have landing gear, you probably wouldn't take off. So she doesn't do a whole lot of flying. Unfortunately, now we can't put her with another bird because for safety reasons, if she got bullied, she probably can't get away. She also can't live in a cage because she can't climb and do the things that she would naturally do. Enrichment for her has to be very specific, and we have to, on top of that, maintain her with baths almost every day because she drags right through any mess she makes. All of this because they didn't give her a friend. I know.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Is it a girl or a boy?
So she came to us as the title female, but without doing a DNA test, there's not a good way for me to know that 100%. And if she'd had that friend, she probably wouldn't have done any of these things. If she'd had that other bird when she got rehomed, she could have had somebody to share that fear, to share that discomfort, to share those concerns. So when you're going out, whether you're buying a $2 parakeet or a $20,000 hyacinth macaw, your job is to make sure that this animal is being kept with a friend of the same species. How many of us like going to zoos and aquariums? Farms, petting zoos, that kind of thing. At the end of the day, did you go home and marry a camel? What if it was your favorite animal? Did you marry a camel? You went home to a human. Your bird needs the same thing, another bird of the same species. So bear that in mind. The other thing to consider with these guys is lifespan. This is a 30-year commitment right here. Your macaw is 120 years. I have 2 macaws on my property. I know the age of 1. He's around 19. That means I have another 20 years left of having that fun, super loving, charming bird. He's not my best friend. So bear that in mind. When we get into the pet world, we ask you to do 2 things at our facility. First and foremost, am I allowed to be your pet? Whether it's state level, county level, city level, HOA level. If those answers are all a yes, then you move on to the second question. Am I going to be able to care for this animal the entirety of its life? If I'm a parrot and I'm going to live 115 years, is that ever going to be a yes? No. So it probably shouldn't be in our pet homes. I've got a tortoise in my property that's got 2 of them. They're going to push 200 years with proper care. My children's unborn children's children is who I need to get permission from. So unless you've got a time machine to actually do that, you probably shouldn't be considering that as a pet. Our #1 most commonly owned tortoise here in Georgia that is legally allowed to be owned as a pet is the Sulcata tortoise. That's a 200-year lifespan. It should not be in our pet industries. In certain states like ours, I have to lift that tortoise up twice a day. My biggest male right now is 120 pounds. Twice a day I have to lift him up and move him in and out of the building because our temperatures are not quite right. All right, we're gonna get my showstopper out here.
Aww, so cute.
All right, so this little one here is super, super adorable. How many of us live on property? Do I have anybody here with an apartment? How many of us live on at least 5 acres? So we have maybe one person in the property here that's qualified to own a kangaroo, space-wise. This little animal here is a red kangaroo. This is not a pet in Georgia. Some states will allow you to own this animal. This is little Rosie. She is 7 months old. When she is 5 years old, especially if she was a full-blooded red-headed male, she will stand 6 feet tall, which means she's taller than me. She will push 200 pounds, which means she's going to outbuck me by about 70 pounds. So bear that in mind. How many of us think we can have a kangaroo in our home? Probably not. She's going to eat everything. She's going to destroy on everything. This does not potty train. It's like owning a goat in your house. There are little poop marbles everywhere. My husband's probably shaking his head right now just thinking about it. I have 2 of them right now in my home. But at the end of the day, she's going to go out into a yard where she has a fence that is 8 feet tall, that technically she could still hop over if she wanted to. Kangaroos in the wild under distress can hop an 8-foot fence. The airfields in Australia know this for a fact because they have kangaroos constantly on their flight paths, which sometimes affects planes violently. She also needs a friend. How many of us have seen kangaroos in National Geographic and in pictures? Are they by themselves?
No.
Mob of 1,500 members. So bear that in mind. Does it make sense for me to have a single kangaroo then? Do you think I am a good companion for this kangaroo? I'm going to be able to socialize and talk to her and do all the things she needs me to do? No. Do you think I want to be the one she's boxing when she gets feisty? It's really cute right now because she's that tall. Ish, maybe that tall. This doesn't stay this way. This is going to end up being a huge animal. What happens if you own this animal here in Georgia? Well, if you get caught with it, most of us are going to get caught with it because we can't keep this cute off of social media. Department of Natural Resources has an algorithm, so if you have an animal in the state of Georgia and is not a legal pet here in Georgia and your Facebook profile is identifying you as a member of this state, they have an algorithm and it's going to pop up and it's going to make a hit on their little computers. And at that point, they're going to go, Susie Q, do you have a kangaroo? You have kangaroo. Yeah, no, we saw it on Facebook. We already see all the evidence we need. They're going to come visit you. You can have this with a proper permit. It is not a pet permit in the state of Georgia. It is a exhibiting license, which means you have to go out every single day and make sure people have education on this animal. How many of us have a 9 to 5? Not a lot.
Good grief. Bunch of retirees.
So you may not have
That's right.
the time that you need to actually clock the hours that you need to clock for this animal to be properly part of an educational program. The other thing to commit with these guys, no, I lost my train of thought. Look at you. When this animal gets confiscated from you, it's different for every animal. If this animal is a kangaroo, how many zoos in this area do you think are going to take a kangaroo without thinking twice? All of us. Why? Because this is a $10,000 animal. If I was to go out and buy this guy on the market, I would be closing into close to $10,000 on this little female. So any free one I could get my hands on to help boost my mob, of course, I'm ready to take it. What if I was a raccoon? If I was found in your home as a raccoon, states are very strict about them. That is a rabies vector. Does not mean that your raccoon has rabies. My raccoons, and we have 5 of them on our property, are all vaccinated with a 3-year vaccine every single year. But if you were to reach your hand out and touch my raccoon, that raccoon by law has to be put to sleep because you yourself are not vaccinated, and now that animal needs to be tested for rabies. It does require euthanasia. It requires taking the head. Unfortunately, that's the result of owning a raccoon here in Georgia. If you had a deer, if it was a cute little deer on the bottle, that probably can get shifted to my property if I have space for it. I have the ability right now to take 4 more deer into my facility. 4. I have 5 currently. Nikki's got first dibs. Her deer go to my property before anybody else's. Out of my 5 deer, I have 1 deer that is a medical non-release because she is missing a front leg. My other 4 were all confiscated after people found them in their yards and kidnapped the deer. Did not find rehabilitators, now kept them. My deer can't go back to the wild not because of medical issues, but because they think people and cars and lawnmowers and dogs are their best friends. And it's a safety risk. Now, luckily for mine, I had really good relationships with the rehabbers that were contacted and with the Department of Natural Resources, so they could safely come to my property. If you have a full-size deer in your property, it's not going anywhere. They cannot relocate that animal safely. There's no way for us to get it to the property and it not die from capture biopathy. So we strongly recommend, if you don't have a license to own these animals, hedgehogs, flying squirrels, foxes, raccoons, alligators, corn snakes, that you don't own them here in our state. Some repercussions are bigger than others. Some repercussions are that way because you don't understand what you're doing. We have a corn snake on our property. She is an albino. Not because she was born that way by nature, because genetically she was morphed into being an all-white snake. She's 27 years old. She came here from Alaska. Couldn't get a single facility to take her in because they only wanted natural colored corn snakes. I took her because she's educational. What would happen if she was to go out into the wild as a male? Well, she's big now, so she'd be able to reproduce with any corn snake that she found. What she would at that point do is then morph all the breeding system of that corn snake. So any of our wild ones could potentially pop up albino. And unfortunately, the albino babies will get eaten within the first 6 months. So the reason we have these laws is not because we don't want you to own them, it's because we can't not be humans. And unfortunately, we can eradicate an entire species because we have morphed an animal in our pet industry. We are now doing this with a venomous snake population. Legally, you're allowed to have a venomous native snake here in Georgia without any permits. You pick up a copperhead, you're allowed to have it as a pet in Georgia. Well, what are we doing with copperheads now? We are now morphing copperheads. How many of us know copperheads have a little cherry or a little Hershey kiss on it? That's the pattern you look for.
I've seen it.
What if I was to tell you that they're now morphing these snakes so that they are banded and striped?
Oh, that's not cool.
If I wasn't familiar with snakes and I got bit by that snake, I might pick it up because it doesn't look like a traditional copperhead. Therefore, getting bit. If you go into the hospital and you get bit by a snake, you need to know what you got bit by. Your antivenom is specific to that species. So what am I supposed to do if I go in there and I tell them I got bit by a snake and it's got stripes on it? Well, we've got coral snake down south. That's about the only snake in Georgia with stripes, so what are they going to think? It's not native. If you get bit by a copperhead here in Georgia, I promise pretty much every hospital has copperhead antivenom. But if I tell you that I got bit by a snake that's not native to here in Georgia, they are now making a phone call down to Venom 1. That's Miami. How long does it take a flight to get from Miami to Georgia? Bare minimum 2 hours. Took you 30 minutes to get to the hospital, another 45 minutes to officially get intaked and processed into that room. So now you are behind the belt by close to 4 hours with the potential of a snake that could have been a venom that needed to activate and get antivenom within an hour. That's why we have these laws. That's why you're not allowed to have non-venom or venomous snakes that are not native to Georgia, because they know you can't get venom fast enough. You will lose your arm or your life in the process. So it's not that we don't want you to have these amazing, beautiful, crazy animals. It's that there's a science behind it, either for invasive species, safety risks, or what it could do to our actual populations here in Georgia and affecting them. So I'm going to turn this over now to a buddy of mine. This is Nikki. So we've had a partnership develop over the last couple years where I have the ability to exhibit animals after they can't go to the wild. Nikki here has got a nonprofit, Camp Critter, over in Athens, and she is your #1 source for rehabilitating native species here in Georgia. So I'm going to turn the floor over to her. She can kind of talk to you about the other end of my world. So it's not, these are retirement. Hers are rejuvenation.
Thank you. So I'm a wildlife rehabilitator. I have a license through the state of Georgia that allows me to house and care for non-RBS native wildlife in the state of Georgia and help them recover whatever ailments they may have, or raise them if they are abandoned, and then help them get back into the wild where they belong. We rehab several different species. My 2 primary species are squirrels and deer. I'm actually one of the few rehabbers in the northern part of the state that is actually licensed for deer. Last year we had 30 fawns come into our care and almost 200 squirrels, and I'm currently sitting at about 40 squirrels at home right now. Possums as well, several different species.
Awesome. Awesome.
They're not good to eat.
Have you seen what they eat?
So this is a native Virginia opossum, and these guys are North America's only marsupial, which is pretty daggone cool. Do you know, somebody say what a marsupial is? Yes, that's right. They have a pouch, and that's where they carry their babies. The gestation on these guys is pretty incredible. Mama, from the time she conceives till she has her babies, is about 6 days. Those babies are born completely neonatal and not even completely developed. They come from the womb. Mom licks a path from the pouch, and they crawl their way into the pouch where they latch onto the nipples. In the pouch, there are 13 nipples. Now, the litter size can range over 13 babies. The first 13 babies to make it to that pouch and to latch onto a nipple are the first 13 to survive to the next stage.
Wow.
The rest do not survive. As those babies start to grow, they will hang outside of the pouch, and as you can imagine, their space gets limited. So they will start, that's when you will see them starting to climb onto the mother's back. A lot of times they can still have that nipple in their mouth. Possums do not have a suckling reflex, which means that you cannot put a nipple up to their mouth and expect them to suck it down. These babies have to be tube fed. A tube has to be placed all the way down to the stomach in order to feed them, because they are so completely neonatal and completely helpless. As they start to grow and to latch onto mother, mom will go on about her business, and then she may drop a few. Mom can't count. So mom has no idea when she drops babies. So a lot of times I get calls from people that have found babies on their porches where mom has come up and been in the cat food and dropped a baby or two, that kind of thing. I get a lot of babies in that way. Another way that I get babies in is when you find these guys hid in the road. It's always a great, I joke with my husband, it took forever for him to get used to willing to do this, but to stop and check the pouch for babies. Because even if mom's hid in the road, the babies can still survive. And I do get a lot of babies in that way. Possum season is starting right now, so you may see a lot of those in the road. Possums also have a prehensile tail. How many of you guys have seen where pictures or something portraying possums hanging from their tail? That's not true.
Their prehensile tail helps them grip. It's basically like another hand. So it's basically for stability, to help them with climbing on branches, to give them some extra stability. But they do not hang. Now these guys, like Kerry was saying, are illegal to own as pets. In the state of Georgia, any native wildlife such as this are illegal, and the DNR will come and get you, and you will get a hefty citation, as well as it can risk the life of any animals you have in your care. DNR has the ability to come in and also euthanize any animals that are caught illegally. So that is, like Kerry was saying about with the deer, last year we had several calls, one of which I did bring to you, where people are caught with deer that they have taken in and they are not legal to have. And sometimes it's a fight to try to convince the DNR officer to transport that baby to a rehabilitator such as myself to try and save the life of that animal. A lot of times that can't be done, which is the case with the one that we brought to you last year. Could not be rehabilitated. She was entirely too tame. She was going to follow us around everywhere, so she ended up going to Kerry's facility. The goal for everyone that comes to us is to go back into the wild. Like Kerry was saying, people will try to have squirrels as pets, and those are awful, awful, awful pets. They will chew up everything you own. Including you. Yes, yes. Look at my arms, my hands. This is just from 8, 9-week-old babies trying to feed them as they're weaning. When you can imagine by the time they hit 14 weeks and it's time to release them, it's ready for them to, they need to go. They need to go be in the wild where they belong.
So the other thing we end up seeing a lot is when we find wildlife and keep it, there's not a lot of science available. There's plenty of research for the right people. And a lot of times what you don't realize is her job is not like you see on Facebook or YouTube or Animal Planet. She doesn't have a facility with 40 people. I have a facility. I have 1 employee. I haven't pulled a paycheck since 2015. We also don't have trailers and campers and a full staff to come grab these animals and take them from you. What we have is us. And in my case, 400 animals. In her case, we're probably pushing around 80 or 90 at this point. Not thanks to me.
A constant flow.
So what people don't realize is this is a full-time job. Whether it's permanent placement or it's rehabilitation, we get a lot of people that want to enter our lines of work thinking this is going to be lucrative and they're going to get a movie star show and they're going to, you know, be on Animal Planet because they're the country critter guys or whatever. And that's not the way it usually works. What it ends up being is how many of us like to go on spring break? I haven't been on spring break for about 20 years. How many of us like to go visit family for the holidays? How many of us, if you had to have a funeral because a family member passed away, you go to the funeral? We don't get to do that because we don't have anybody to take care of those animals on our property. In my facility, I have 2 small girls. I have an 11-year-old and an 8-year-old. And all day long when people come, they say, "Oh, you have the life I always wanted. My dream is amazing. You're so great." My kids look at them dead in their face and they go, "There's a lot of poop." Because that's what my kids experience. They get up at 6 o'clock in the morning. They're in my building by about 7 or 8, and they clean for the next 3 or 4 hours. That's their Saturday and Sunday. They're here doing these presentations, working with the animals. They don't get to go to birthday parties because that's my weekends. We're working. We don't do sports because I can't take kangaroos into a sports facility and accomplish my kids learning a sport. They don't get to go out on spring break. They don't do slumber parties. They don't do these other things. So there's a lot of things that you got to consider. It's not just, I have a kangaroo. This kangaroo is my life. And everybody else in my family evolves into that. So it's very important to understand that animals are a commitment. And if you're at school all day long, if you're at work all day long, If you are working with these animals, you have to do that all day long. When it's snowing, I have to be out there in miserable, wet, cold conditions because that's what my animals need, because they need hay barriers up. When Georgia decides in the middle of the night, we're gonna have a 30-degree night, all of a sudden, that means I need to be at Tractor Supply, getting every piece of hay and straw that I can find, because I need to be stuffing enclosures so that animals that are in outdoor enclosures have what they need. That means when you guys are out enjoying 4th of July and the fireworks, I'm sitting in a kangaroo pen praying to gods I don't know, hoping that my kangaroos don't get terrified. When I see a helicopter hovering overhead because somebody's having a joyride, my heart is going, please don't hit a fence, please don't hit a fence, please don't hit a fence, please don't hit a fence. When I have a lawnmower, I'm terrified that I'm going to get so close to the fence that this animal is going to drive into that fence wall and stop its heart. These are things you don't think about, because when you guys come out to a facility like mine, or you see a show that hosts a rehabilitator, they show you the cute moments. Your YouTube video for an African serval on that film for 2 seconds doesn't show you how bad that building stinks. Doesn't show you that at feeding time, that animal is going to grab your hand accidentally with a fang and a set of claws and scrape down on what you're hoping is not a vein or an artery, because that's what he does. They didn't explain to you that that cat, even neutered or spayed, sprays, boys and girls. So your house is going to smell like the backside of that cat. So that's why we do this. We do this because not only do we love the animals, but we respect them. We both are in a heavy belief that loving an animal gets an animal in trouble. Respecting that an animal needs to be beyond you is what gets that animal what it needs. It is amazing to own a kangaroo. Don't get me wrong. I love and breathe and live with kangaroos. It's amazing to have a possum. In a lot of situations, that's a fantastic pet. But at the end of the day, it's not a pet here. So we just need to make sure that we're doing what we can to own these guys correctly in where they're supposed to be. If you love owning animals and you have the time, the space, the energy, the money. My last female kangaroo cost me $30,000 in 3 months. She did not come home from the vet, despite all of our efforts throughout the entire world. We drove that animal down to Florida in an 11-hour drive through the night because we couldn't find the ability to care for her here in Georgia. She spent 3 months with Dr. K. She transported every single day with a network of people that I had never even met before, because I had that much love and support for this animal that I could find complete strangers that were willing to stop their day to transport her from the vet's office to a hyperbaric chamber because of the infection she was left in a facility that was about to send her to an auction. At the end of the day, we couldn't fix her. But it was worth it because we know now exactly what it is we needed to do faster next time. We had people all the way in Australia. How many of us have known Steve Irwin? Heard of him. His wonderful, beautiful daughter, Bindi, mailed over Melaleuca honey patches to put on her feet, because that was how big our network had to be for that poor animal, because somebody didn't want to spend $1,500 to begin with, but they wanted a kangaroo that they were making a profit off of by exhibiting her. So it's very important to understand, as much as we love these animals, respecting them is what they command, what they need, what they deserve. So whether you're helping support causes to produce a reduction in their hunting, keeping them out of private homes where they're not supposed to be, or just owning them correctly. If you're going to get into that animal world, just ask that you make sure that that animal is treated first, not as a prize, not as an ego trip, as what it is and what it needs to be. And if you can't facilitate what it physically needs and what it should have and what legally is allowed to have here in our state, then make sure that you're accommodating other ways. If you need to be able to have interactions with those animals like that, there are plenty of facilities like mine where you can come volunteer. It's a lot of poop. It stinks. It's a lot of poop. But you'll, at the end of the day, get to snuggle with this animal and interact with this animal directly. Get that fixed in a way that's safe and better respecting for this animal, and help learn how to better help this animal, whether it's in this world or her world, and make sure that they're given what they're supposed to be. Luckily for this little animal, we had a space available to take her in. This is not a pet. This was not kept as a pet. Unfortunately, her mom was hit by a car, and she was thrown from that pouch. Little Violet there doesn't have that foot, so she can't go back out to the world. I want to help animals like her all day long, because at the end of the day, that's who needs me, not a glorified Disney moment. That should not be on my property. I shouldn't be able to look at any animal on my property and say, you know what, you're here because somebody watched a really good Disney movie when they were 10. We love Disney.
I love Bambi.
Never gonna be a princess. It's fine. I'm okay with that. She's okay with it. We figured it out. The animal world should be respected the same way.
Well, and it's like that for the rehabilitators too. If we end up full of animals that have been kept as pets, trying to follow them up, then we can't be available for the animals that are truly injured and really need our help, instead of it being because of the human interaction.
Yep. She's got a lot of animals in her facility right now that are there because they were fed breast milk and they weren't provided calcium and their back legs don't work and they're jelly. And it's heartbreaking for us to invest the amount of time and energy into these animals, knowing that an animal or a human being put them there. Yeah.
Oh,
hello,
yes, and that's the least of some of the stuff I've heard. Cow's
We
milk,
had a
breast
sheep
milk,
come in,
apple juice.
and they fed him milk you buy from a store. I have a question.
Yeah.
Do we get to pet the animals?
What?